All right, here we go, folks. President Trump is talking tough on nukes with Russia, and we're going to talk about what that actually means today. Before we get to that, though, there was breaking news that a FBI investigation revealed the planning stages for two terrorist attacks up in Michigan. Take a look.
This morning, the FBI says it prevented a potential terrorist attack and arrested multiple people in Michigan. FBI Director Kash Patel says these suspects were plotting a violent attack over Halloween weekend. The FBI field office in Detroit confirmed there was law enforcement activity in Dearborn, which are one of two cities outside of Detroit where they were having those operations.
So, don't know a whole lot more than that about these potential attacks. Dearborn, Michigan, of course, is a extremely. It's let's just say there are a lot of extremists in Dearborn, Michigan. A lot of jihadis that happen to live up there, just outside of Detroit. So it's not real surprising that they would find something like that in Dearborn, but it is concerning for sure, and we'll have to keep an eye on it. Kudos to the FBI, Kash Patel, and Dan Bongino for actually making that a real priority under this administration. So, folks, my name's Chuck Holton. If you haven't heard of me before, I'm a former Army Ranger who has been a war correspondent across the globe for 23 years or so. Been to most countries in the world, and I cover wars and disasters specifically. So I wanted to ask you if you would do me a favor and just post where you're watching from in the chat box. And while we're at it, I want to show you another interesting news item that I uncovered just a few minutes ago about gold.
Purchased a record 75.6 metric tons of gold in 2024, marking a 6% increase from the year prior. The surge reflects a shift in consumer behavior as people sought to safeguard their savings amid escalating Western sanctions. The demand covering bullion, coins and jewelry now accounts for nearly a quarter of Russia's annual gold output. This positions the country as the fifth largest retail gold buyer globally. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, gold demand has soared by over 60%. Sanctions have strained cross-border transactions, triggered foreign currency shortages, and driven the ruble to historic lows. As traditional investments in dollars and euros become riskier, Russians increasingly turn to gold, viewing it as a stable source of value and economic uncertainty.
So, folks, gold is obviously the kind of place that you want to put your money when things are crazy, when everything's uncertain in the world. And obviously the Russians are taking that to heart. They've purchased more than 282 tons of gold. That's retail gold. That's not the government buying it. That's the people in Russia buying it. And they're doing it because they want to safeguard their wealth. Well, you can do that too. The U.S. economy is on better footing than the Russian one for sure, but that doesn't mean that hard times are not on the way in the future. So I wanted to point out that preservegold.com is a great place for you to put your wealth if you have a retirement plan or something like that. I've had a lot of people, I was showing this 1 ounce gold coin that I carry with me when I travel, just for kind of insurance right there. And people are saying, well, what good is it if you have a quarter size coin that's worth $4,000? How are you going to buy a bag of chips with that? And that is not the reason that you carry gold or that you hold physical gold. You do that to safeguard the value of your wealth. So, the United States, massive quantitative easing where they were pumping $60 billion a month into the economy, that is like a backdoor tax on your money. And so by getting gold, you can avoid losing the value of your money. And actually, gold has been performing better than the S&P 500 over the last 5 years, up more than 100% in the last 5 years. So there's that as well. Also, if you really want a smaller amount of gold, Preserve Gold also sells these tiny little, this is a 1/10 ounce gold coin. It's smaller than a dime and it's worth about $400. And that'd be a good gift maybe for your grandkids this Christmas. Or you could also get silver coins like this silver dollar, which is worth about $45 right now. And obviously you're getting closer to being able to buy groceries with something like this if the whole world falls apart. The bottom line is you can go to preservegold.com/Chuck-Holton, or just text the word Chuck to 50505, and you can get a hold of Preserve Gold. You can talk to a real person up there, no sales gimmicks. They will tell you if gold is right for you, and they'll keep you out of the paper derivatives that leave you just holding nothing but paper if everything goes to heck. So thank you to Preserve Gold for being our sponsor today. And I like to try to use those sponsorship ad reads to actually teach you something. And that's why we go a little longer than the typical 60 seconds, because I want you to understand why I stand behind Preserve Gold and why I recommend it to you. Now, let's go back and talk about what happened with President Trump. He put out this tweet a couple days ago that said, the United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. This was accomplished including a complete update and renovation of existing weapons during my first term in office. Because of the tremendous destructive power, I hated to do it, but had no choice. Russia is second, China is distant third, but we will be even within 5 years because of other countries' testing programs. I've instructed, he's talking about Russia there. I've instructed the Department of War to start testing our nuclear weapons on an equal basis. That process will begin immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Okay, so what is President Trump talking about there? First of all, we have to point out when President Trump says something that's incorrect, and he is incorrect in saying that the United States has more nuclear weapons than any other country. In real terms, Russia has more nuclear weapons than we do, but not by much. And not that it really matters, because once you get over about 4, you've got enough to destroy the entire planet. And so, there's that. But actually, Russia's got quite a bit more tactical nukes than we do. Those are the smaller, low-yield nukes that are maybe up to 1 kiloton or 1 megaton, sorry. And so, like, we have about 100 of them, and Russia's got over 1,100 of them. Now, when it comes to the number of nuclear weapons that we have, here's a graph that you can look at that'll kind of explain it to you. Russia, the red part of the graph is missiles that are deployed, that are actually ready to fire at a moment's notice. And so you could kind of give President Trump some grace for saying the United States has the most nuclear weapons, because we actually have more nuclear weapons that are ready to fire than Russia does. And you're talking about 1,700 versus 1,800 nuclear weapons there. It's not a big difference, but it is a difference. And in reality, we would really never get to the rest of the nuclear weapons, because if we fired all of our currently deployed nuclear weapons at each other, there wouldn't be a world left to live in. So there's that. Now, if we, again, take a look at this, the orange part of the graph shows reserve nuclear weapons that are in storage but are able to be put into place and then, made active on short notice. And then the gray part of the graph is retired nuclear weapons that are still nuclear weapons. They're still out there, but they're not usable at this point. I mean, it would take some work to get them to a place where we could actually use them. So you can kind of discount those ones. They're just in storage someplace. And really, it's the red part of that graph that's important. And it shows that between the two of us, we've got over 3,000 nuclear weapons. And that doesn't even include, you look at some of these other countries, France has got a couple hundred, almost 300. The UK has got 200. India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea. I mean, all of those. China's got about 600 total. President Trump says that China will be even with us in 5 years. That's probably an exaggeration. I don't think it's likely that China is going to go from 600 to 1,500 in 5 years, but maybe they will. At any rate, what caused President Trump to do this is President Putin has been making some noises lately about testing not nuclear weapons, but nuclear weapons delivery platforms. And there's that's an important distinction. So, for example, they tested a nuclear missile delivery system, a ICBM, that they say it's called the Bereshnik, and they say that it's nuclear powered. So the engine that powers the missile is a nuclear powered engine, if you can believe that. Now, they say that they tested this successfully. The problem is there are a lot of places around the world that have stations that would be able to pick up if they were testing, ICBM of any kind, much less a nuclear one. And none of them have picked up anything to show that Russia actually tested a nuclear powered ICBM. Of course, the ICBM could carry a nuclear missile on it as well. What they're saying is that this Bereshnik missile could they could launch it and it could circle the globe indefinitely. It could just fly forever, fly around, and fly around, just waiting for the moment when the Russian government gives it permission to strike something. And that sounds pretty scary, except that everybody would know it was up there and it would likely get intercepted. It's not like it is able to maneuver, but so it would be harder to intercept, but it's not impossible to intercept something like that. And so it would likely get intercepted. But it just has unlimited range. Now, the Russians have a history of exaggerating their capabilities, let's say. I mean, they said that they had the second most powerful military on planet Earth right before they launched their attack on Ukraine in 2022. That turned out to be false. Russia turned out to be kind of a paper tiger. What they didn't take into account, they may have actually believed that they were the second most powerful military in the world. But what they didn't take into account was the absolutely stratospheric amount of corruption in the Russian military. So there were generals who were tasked with modernizing buying new tires for all of the military trucks in the Russian, armory. And they went out and bought the cheapest garbage Chinese-made tires they could find, and then took the rest of the money and put it in their pocket. And then they put those trucks in storage for years, and the tires got all dry rotted. And so when they tried to drive them, pull them out to, use them in the initial invasion of Ukraine, a lot of them broke down, and all of the spare tires were also dry rotted and falling apart. So they didn't have what they needed to actually complete that invasion. Also, you have to understand the way that the government works in Russia, that it's kind of one of those things where if you tell Vladimir Putin something he doesn't like, you and your whole family will likely disappear. So if you're a general in charge of something in the Russian military, you have a vested interest in making whatever you're doing sound as rosy as possible, even if you're losing a battle. So I'll give you a case in point here. I'll take this one down and let me add in this screen. This is Deep State map right here. Okay, so we're gonna look at deep state map now here for a second. This is the front line in Ukraine. Now, the last time I was in Ukraine, I was in this area with my son Nathan. As a matter of fact, Nathan, I don't think my pointer is working on there. Let's see if I can. Yeah, okay, you can see my pointer now. This dot right here, Nate, was where we went and visited those Ukrainian soldiers in the underground bunker with Christian Hickey, if you recall. And so it was right where that military unit from the Russians is now. So you can see that the Russians have taken that ground and have moved up to this point, which is only about a 10-minute drive. And so it's not all that far in about a year. It's taken them about a year to move that far because this was right on the front lines when we were there in December of last year, 11 months ago. So in taking that ground, they're trying to take the town of Pokrovsk right here. Pokrovsk is a town of 60,000 people, and Russia is claiming that they've taken it, but actually the red part of this is the only parts that Russia actually holds right now. Russia has said that they've closed this gap right here, and they've cut off a bunch of Ukrainian troops that are in this pocket right here. Those troops are at risk of being cut off, but they are not cut off yet. And so Pokrovsk is a town of about 60,000 people. Let's see if I can, there we go, put me down in the corner. Pokrovsk is a town of about 60,000 people, and it's taken Russia 120,000 casualties to take as much of Pokrovsk as they've actually taken so far. However, the generals that are briefing Vladimir Putin are telling Putin that they have closed this gap. Let's see that they've closed this gap right here, and that they have completely cut off all the troops in there, and they've taken all of Pokrovsk. Well, that's not true. And these maps are very accurate by my experience. They are put together by open source intelligence, like organizations like Deep State, using third-party intelligence, satellite imagery, and all that sort of thing. And so they are painting a too rosy picture of this battle for Pokrovsk to Vladimir Putin, to the point where Putin said, excuse me, just a second, I'm going to get a drink. Putin said yesterday in a meeting that he had that he was thinking about traveling to Pokrovsk to see it for himself. Now, you can imagine that made his generals kind of go like, because if Vladimir Putin actually went to Pokrovsk, he would see that they don't actually hold Pokrovsk. And Vladimir Zelensky said, oh, I hope he does. That'd be great, because we know what would happen to him if he did. So all of that to say, I mean, I didn't mean to spend a lot of time giving you a granular update on the front lines in Ukraine, but all of that to say that the Russians have a vested interest in lying to Vladimir Putin about the progress of the war. And so, for example, they didn't tell him at all about that. Matter of fact, you haven't seen any reporting in Russian media about, here, let me put that map back up for you. Right north of this pocket, this is what we were just looking at here. If you see this part that's blue and green up there, that's a part that the Russians pushed into and took over, and then they lost it again to the Ukrainians. And in so doing, they lost about 10,000 Russian troops, mostly captured. Okay. And there was no reporting on that in Russian state media. It's likely that they just forgot to tell Vladimir Putin about it. So they exaggerate. And it's the same thing with their nuclear capabilities. So if they say, well, we have this Berezhnik missile that can fly around the world for unlimited amounts of time and nobody can stop it, And we've already tested it and we know it's successful. Well, there's no independent reporting whatsoever. Nobody has picked up any sign that Russia has successfully tested an intercontinental ballistic missile at all in recent weeks. So it's likely that that's an exaggeration. I did some kind of deep searching into what it would take to actually build a nuclear powered missile like that, and the answer is it would be extremely technically difficult to make it work. If they were able to make it work, it'd be unbelievably expensive. Russia is kind of hurting from cash right now, so it's not likely they're going to build hundreds of these things or anything like that. And so even if they were able to successfully build one of them, it's not likely that thing's ever going to get used or, you know, whatever. So you take like their Oreshnik missiles, for example. Russia has talked about this hypersonic missile they have, the Oreshnik, which is very fast. It can go like 10 times the speed of sound. That's 5,000 miles an hour. That's pretty fast. That doesn't mean that it's 100% unstoppable. If it's coming at you, you know, a Patriot missile battery could actually have a chance of taking it out. A Patriot missile is not going to be able to catch one if it's coming from behind, but if it's coming right at you and you can come, you know, directly nose to nose with it, you could potentially take it out. However, it is definitely a very lethal missile, and it has the MIRV capability, multiple independent reentry vehicle capability, so it can carry multiple warheads at once. And Russia used one of them against Ukraine in the city of Dnipro back a year and a half ago or so. And the reason, and it did not have a nuclear warhead on it, obviously. They actually didn't even have a warhead at all on it. It just had weight in the front, just ballast in the front of that missile. Believe me, Russia did not do that out of the goodness of their heart. Well, we just wanted to, you know, warn everybody that we have this capability and we're, you know, we don't want to actually hurt anybody. So we're going to shoot this missile without any explosives on it, just to show you what we're capable of, just as a warning. That is laughable on its face. Why? Because Russia has made a incredible, let's see, I lost one of those. Let me see, remove this. Russia has made a habit of, let's see if I've got this here. Where'd it go? No, I guess I didn't get that. Oh, here it is. Nope, I don't have it. Sorry. I had a graph, I can't find it, of the number of drones and missiles that Russia is firing at Ukraine on a regular basis. And I think that's from War Mapper, actually. Let's see if I can find it. And yeah, I think it's War Mapper. Nope, it's not War Mapper. Well, I don't know where it is. Anyway, it was a graph that showed that Russian attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine has gone up exponentially over the past couple of years, especially in the last 12 months. Russia has just yesterday fired like 700 missiles and drones at civilian targets in Ukraine. They're not firing these at military targets, at military buildup of troops, headquarters, anything like that. They're hitting random apartment buildings around Ukraine. Fortunately for Ukraine, they are able to shoot down most of the drones and missiles that Russia sends. But out of the 700 missiles that Russia fired, about 20 of them got through. You know, they're partially doing this because they used to fire 20 missiles a day and one of them would get through. And that wasn't just having any effect on Ukraine. So they're trying to overwhelm Ukraine's defenses. Of the 20 that got through yesterday, a half dozen were inert, were actually decoys that didn't have any explosives on them. So 2 people died from 700 missiles and drones that Russia fired at civilian targets across Ukraine yesterday. The numbers are pretty amazing, really. I mean, obviously it's a huge tragedy for the civilians and the families of those civilians who are being killed by Russia. But when you take into account the fact that Russia's sending 700 munitions, long-range munitions at civilian targets across Ukraine, and only 2 people die, that's amazing. It's amazing. And it's not sustainable on the part of Russia, because imagine what that cost Russia, 700 missiles and drones. You're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe, I don't know, tens of millions at least. And they kill 2 people with that. So, it costs you $5 million in missiles and drones for every Ukrainian you're killing. That's not on the front line. That's not sustainable. And they're not going to take over Ukraine like that. Now, some people say that is an argument for Russia resorting to nuclear weapons, but I don't think that's true. I don't think Russia is dumb enough to resort to nuclear weapons, because all of the NATO countries who have nuclear weapons, like the UK and France and et cetera, have said if Russia uses nukes, they will have nukes used on them. And so these things work as a deterrent and not much else. Now, when it comes to those Oreshnik missiles, some sources believe that Russia only has like 13 of those things. Some sources say they have much less, maybe only 3 that are functional. Russia is not in a point economically right now where they could churn out a whole bunch of those things, because their economy is spiraling downward. The inflation rates keep going up. The central bank of Russia had raised the interest rates to 23%. That was the Fed funds rate in Russia, 23%, to try to, put a damper on the hyperinflation. And Vladimir Putin, got angry about that and went to the head of the Reserve Bank of Russia and said, you have to lower interest rates because people can't afford to borrow any money. And the head of the federal, funds, or the federal bank, said, Mr. President, if we do that, we could experience hyperinflation in Russia. And that's one of the reasons why Russians are absolutely clamoring to buy gold and silver, because what they want to avoid is the Venezuela effect, where, you have all this cash that's absolutely worthless because of hyperinflation. There was look, this right here is a 20,000 Bolivar note from Venezuela. 20,000 Bolivars. Do you know that in the 1990s, one Bolivar was worth about 25 cents, meaning 4 Bolivars to the dollar. So this would have been a $5,000 bill if they had those back then, but they didn't. And now this thing is literally not worth the paper that it's printed on. It's not worth anything. I tried to use them as business cards for a while, and it wasn't working because they're kind of plasticky. Russia wants to avoid having that happen, but they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if they lower interest rates, then the inflation rate is going to go through the roof. And the only thing that will be any good is gold, silver, or US dollars. There are a lot of people in Russia who hold US dollars as a reserve against the vagaries of the Russian state. But even that is getting inflated. I mean, our inflation rate is nowhere near what Russia's is, but it's still a backdoor tax on your dollars every year. During the Obama administration, they were pumping so much cash just out of thin air, pumping it into the money supply in the U.S. that they were devaluing the U.S. dollar by about 10% a year. So that's like an extra 10% tax on you if you hold American dollars. That extra 10% tax is on top of all the other taxes you pay. And if you're in the top tax bracket, you could literally get to the point where you're paying 75% of your income in taxes in one form or another, including inflation. So obviously, inflation bad. That's one of the reasons why interest rates in the United States are historically high right now, because they had to tamp down the inflation rate that we got during COVID, when the government just pumped money like a drunk sailor into the economy to try to prop up the economy when nobody was working. That created massive inflation, and they've spent the last 4 or 5 years trying to tamp it back down. And that's why mortgage rates in the United States are 7% or something now. Mortgage rates in Russia would be close to 30% at this point. So that's obviously a big drain on the Russian economy. Now, the United States has, I wanted to point out one other missile that Russia was threatening, or, saying that they had developed. This is the Poseidon. They call it Russia's Doomsday nuclear torpedo. This is apparently it's essentially a nuclear missile that travels underwater and can deploy a warhead that's up to 100 megatons. That's 10 times the power of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. That'd be a pretty major thing. What it's saying is that it could create a 200-foot tsunami, tidal wave, that would wipe out coastal areas, in something out of a movie like this. Okay. However, I did some more research on this, and scientifically that really doesn't hold up. It would take very specific bathymetry to create a tidal wave like this. Now, what it would do is, if they set it off, is it would irradiate large swaths of the sea along the seashore, and it certainly would cause some flooding and stuff like that inland. But I mean, you look at the explosion that the United States is one of the last nuclear tests that the U.S. did off the Bikini Atoll, out in the Pacific. There was a 21 megaton bomb, I believe, and it did not cause a tsunami. So it's not likely that this would, really do what they say it would do, but it would be very, very bad. There's no question. Now, they're saying that it's completely like stealth. Nobody could detect it. It's undetectable. That's not exactly the case. We certainly have a system in place with the U.S. Navy that could detect something like this that's, driving around undersea. It would make some noise, and we have, of course, submarines and sub-hunters and things like that could pick it up. We have listening stations throughout the ocean, unmanned drones and ships that are floating around the ocean collecting data of all kinds right now. And so it's very likely that something like this would get noticed if it got, fired undersea. And there is a possibility that it could be intercepted. It would be difficult, but it's possible. So again, the claims that Russia is making are a little exaggerated at minimum. Okay. Now, why is Russia doing this now? That's the bigger question. And I think the answer is because, from what I showed you on the front lines, after months of minimal movement, even Russian mill bloggers are calling this a stalemate. They're calling this a boondoggle. And so, these are people whose lives are at risk by saying so. And to hear them say that this is a stalemate is obviously not good for Russia. Meanwhile, Russia's escalating their terror campaigns against Ukraine, civilian targets, energy, gas, that sort of thing. And that's partially in response to the fact that the Ukrainians have been very effectively taking out Russian critical infrastructure when it comes to oil and natural gas over the past few months. As a matter of fact, they believe, degraded Russian capability to produce oil and natural gas and get it to market by about 20%. That is a huge hit for the Russian government, who gets about 40% of their total revenues from the oil and gas industry. So when the ground war stalls, the Kremlin points to the camera and says, look at these wonder weapons we've got, and we're going to point these missiles at civilians. So this Doomsday nuclear torpedo, think of it like it's actually more of a terror weapon against civilian targets, because, name for me a 50-mile stretch of beach anywhere in the world that only contains a military target. There isn't such a thing. Any military base, naval base, if you hit the naval base in Norfolk, you're talking about several million people that live along the coast that would be affected by something like that if it were detonated offshore. Also, when they detonate bombs in the ocean tends to absorb a lot of the shock. So again, this is not going to be as powerful as they say it would be. All right, so that's enough about that. Now, if you have questions, folks, I'll get to your questions in a minute. So don't worry about that. Stick around, and I will get to your questions. One last thing I wanted to talk about was the news that came out just last night that President Trump has, he's ordered the Pentagon to designate specific targets inside Venezuela for airstrikes that could start any day. So they have done that. They've identified air defense capabilities. They've identified military bases, naval bases, and government centers and things like that, things that are legitimate military targets across Venezuela. And it is very likely that we will see strikes on those targets in the very near future, in the next 48 hours even. I hope they wait until Monday, because I'm headed to Trinidad on Monday, and I'll be hopefully want to be there for it. I see that Abraham says, have you ever been to Trinidad and Tobago, West Indies? Yes, I have, actually. But the last time I was there was about 15 years ago. And so I'm looking forward to going back to Trinidad here in a couple days. All right, somebody's asking how, Jessica says, who controls the power plant in Ukraine? You're probably talking about the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, Jessica. Right now, Russia is in control of that, but you understand that there are 9 nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Chernobyl is one of them. It's still under the control of the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are in control of all of them except for Zaporizhia. Zaporizhia is the largest one. It's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And the Russians have controlled it since the opening days of the war. So this was actually mentioned by a guy named Frank Rose, and I want to play you a little clip from Frank about what he had to say about that. This guy is a chairman, I guess he's the National Nuclear Security Agency, NNSA, something like that. And he gave a speech talking about the irresponsibility of that Russia is engaging in by threatening this Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Take a listen.
Warns that, quote, the expansion of nuclear weapons stockpiles and their delivery systems, coupled with increasing regional conflicts involving nuclear weapons states, pose a significant challenge, end quote. Of these competitors, Russia maintains the largest and most capable nuclear weapons stockpile, and even prior to its invasion of Ukraine, was working to expand and modernize its nuclear weapons capabilities. Moscow continues to develop long-range nuclear-capable missiles and underwater delivery systems meant to penetrate or bypass missile defenses. Russia is also expanding its large, diverse, and modern set of non-strategic systems capable of delivering nuclear warheads. These capabilities are particularly ominous given President Putin's dangerous and irresponsible statements and those of other Russian officials hinting at the potential use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine has also featured an unprecedented event in the history of warfare: ongoing hostilities around and armed seizure of an operating civil nuclear power plant. The risks associated with military activities around and against Ukraine's nuclear facilities cannot be overstated. These activities undercut nuclear safety, hinder the International Atomic Energy's ability to fulfill its safeguards and security mandate, and increase the risk of a nuclear emergency that could affect large numbers of people in Ukraine and neighboring states.
So what he's talking about there is that, look, nuclear rhetoric has consequences. It's closely scrutinized by governments and contractors and outside analysts, and it can have unintended consequences. So one of those unintended consequences is that as President Putin has been rolling out these terror weapons and claiming to have these unstoppable nuclear weapons, President Trump feels the need to order the nuclear testing of American nuclear weapons. Now, the United States has not tested a nuclear weapon since 1992. Russia tested their last nuclear weapon in 1994, China in 1996. And that was the last major nuclear test of a nuclear weapon in the last 30 years. They're now Pakistan and India both tested them a little later than that, but the last big ones. President Trump is responding to these kind of veiled threats from Vladimir Putin. And so he's saying, okay, I'm going to order America's forces to start testing nuclear weapons. Well, Russia has not tested any yet. They've said they were going to, but they haven't. Russia pulled out of the START treaty in 2022, right after the invasion of Ukraine. So that gives us a lot less visibility on what Russia is actually doing and not doing. But if they made a nuclear test, we would know. And they haven't. So it doesn't make sense for the United States to go ahead with a nuclear test, which would have to take place about 60 miles northwest of Las Vegas, because of the incredible cost. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars to do. Of course, there's a major environmental fallout and problems that are caused by real nuclear tests. Even though they're now done deep underground, it still causes problems. And we actually have the capability now to model anything we want on a computer, and we don't have to actually test it for real. So what the experts are saying is that President Trump's saying we should start testing our nuclear stuff. We're testing our nuclear stuff all the time. We're just not doing live nuclear tests of actual nuclear bombs. And there's no real reason for us to do that anymore. So, other than the political sort of capital that maybe President Trump is trying to get out of that, America, we're blowing the things up, whatever. But it is concerning that China is trying to catch up with the United States, that they've been making, their arsenal has been growing more quickly than it's grown in the past. And Frank Rose had something to say about China as well. So take a listen to that.
China is in the midst of the largest ever nuclear force expansion and arsenal diversification in its history. According to the Department of Defense's annual report on Chinese military power, quote, the PRC is investing in and expanding the number of its land, sea, and air-based nuclear delivery platforms and constructing the infrastructure necessary to support this major expansion of its nuclear forces, end quote. This includes developing and building a fast breeder reactors and reprocessing facilities that would enable the swift expansion of its warhead manufacturing capability. Consequently, if it continues the current pace of its...
So that concerns me more than Russia. I mean, Russia, like I say, is kind of on the ropes economically. China is in a better position, and they're rapidly investing in upgrading, modernizing, and increasing their nuclear arsenal. That's bad. North Korea has now said they're going to do the same thing. That's bad. That's a bigger issue. And so the United States is in the process of modernizing our nuclear arsenal. It's not finished. President Trump suggested that we've completed those modernization efforts. That's not true. It hasn't quite done that. But the red meat here is that because of these other countries' testing programs and what they're doing, President Trump is signaling to the rest of the world that we're going to do the same thing. And in reality, it's not much of a change from what we were doing already. It's not likely that we will conduct an actual nuclear bomb explosion unless Russia or China or somebody does that. But we regularly conduct missile flight tests and things like that. So the experts are saying there's not any real technical reason why we need to do these tests, a live nuclear test. And so they're saying that, look, if I was advising a president, I would say something along the lines of, you need to fully understand the global ramifications of doing a live nuclear test because of the ability of other countries like Russia and China with satellites and things like that to gather data on a live test. We would actually be giving them more data than they have, and we would be hurting our own, parity. That we'd be hurting our own chances of staying ahead of the Chinese and or the Russians. So we don't want to do a live nuclear test. It's a bad idea. If we do that, we're going to be given a ton of intel to our enemies that we don't need to, and there's no real reason to do that. Okay. So if you look at the grand total of nuclear weapons that are held around the world, you're talking about over 12,000 nuclear weapons now. And that is obviously why we should be focusing on non-proliferation, on getting rid of the nuclear weapons and not getting more of them. But this is where we are. This is 2025 for you. Okay, so let's go back to some of our questions. Cheryl asked if I'll be covering the potential crisis unfolding this weekend. You're talking about the, apocalypse, the snap EBT apocalypse. Yeah, depending on what happens, I'll certainly cover that. No question. What can American civilians do to be prepared for worst case scenarios? Mike Silva said, well, I would recommend that you pick up my book, Death of Civilization, because that's a manual on what you can do realistically to actually make you and your family and your community safer by making them more resilient. And it's a whole lot more than just buying freeze-dried food and ammunition. It's a whole lot more than that. So I put a lot into that book. Folks, you can get a copy of that book for free, a downloaded PDF version, if you become a supporter over at chuckholton.com. That helps keep us doing what we do. And appreciate all of you who are our supporters over there and have been faithfully supporting us now for years. If you, let's see, maybe we can put up that chuckholton.com is where you go. That'll take you to locals. You can sign up as a subscriber for free and get access to a lot of extra stuff, or sign up as a supporter and get access to phone calls with me every month. We're putting together some other goodies for our supporters that I don't want to put out just yet. So there's a lot that you get out of being a member over at chuckholton.com, and you get the kind of pride of saying that you are helping people in need around the globe. As I travel around and I meet people in need, that a lot of that money goes to people that need it. So thank you very much to all of you who are supporters over at chuckholton.com. All right, so let's go back to our comments. Preston Stewart, Klamath River Media says, has reported that Pokrovsk is about to fall in Ukraine. Yeah, I already answered this. I showed you the, I can show you again real quick if I can find that map. Here it is. This is the map of what Pokrovsk looks like. It's called Deep State Map. And Pokrovsk is right down here. Right here. This is Pokrovsk. So if you zoom in on it, the center of Pokrovsk is over here. This area. This is the center of Pokrovsk. And it's in gray, which means it's disputed territory. Now, Russia is claiming that they've taken control of it. Ukraine says, no, it's been very rainy, so they've been able to infiltrate soldiers into Pokrovsk in civilian clothes so that our drones won't target them. And that is a war crime. It's called perfidy. If you are fighting in a war, you're not allowed to dress up in civilian clothes in order to look like a civilian and keep from being engaged by the enemy. And so Russia is breaking the laws of war by doing that. But just because they are able to infiltrate some soldiers into Pokrovsk doesn't mean that they control Pokrovsk, and those guys are getting slowly but surely taken out. So it looked like it was about to fall. At one point, the Russians claimed that it had fallen. They're still claiming that. But according to Deep State maps, that is not the case. So I already covered that. Minnesota says, is it renamed Dnipropetrovsk? No. Dnipro, the city of Dnipro in Ukraine, it's in central Ukraine, right along the Dnieper River. When it was a part of the Soviet Union, it was called Dnipropetrovsk, which is very difficult to pronounce. During the Soviet Union times, almost all of the cities in Ukraine had different names. Kiev, which is now called, was called Kiev back then. Kharkiv was called Kharkov, et cetera, et cetera. And you can kind of tell where somebody stands on the Ukraine war by listening to how they pronounce the names of the places in Ukraine. If they're using the Ukrainian pronunciation, if they say Kiev instead of Kiev, if they say Kharkov or instead of Kharkiv, well, then you know where they stand. They're supporting the Russians. And that's why like guys like Scott Ritter and and Patrick Lancaster and jack wagons like that, they all use the Russian pronunciation of those places. And the Ukrainians call Dnipropetrovsk Dnipro. So that's a long answer to a short question. Okay, so question, what does Russia gain by targeting civilians? What they're trying to do is they're trying to terrorize Ukraine into submission. They're realizing that they cannot they cannot take over Ukraine realistically unless they get the Ukrainians to assist them with that by giving up. And the Ukrainians are not about to give up. And every one of these strikes just makes the Ukrainians more determined to continue fighting. And so it's not an effective strategy, but it's the only one they have. This is typical Soviet strategy. Actually, if we look at Orikhiv, we'll go out here. Let me go back to this map here for a second, and I'll show you down here near Zaporizhia. Okay, so here's Zaporizhia, right? And the nuclear power plant is right there. And that's, I'm sorry, the nuclear power plant's right there. And it's under the control of the Russians, but the rest of this land is not. And when I went to visit the town of Orikhiv, it's on one of my trips to Ukraine, I visited this village right here. And I'll show you what I saw there. I want to let you watch this piece because I think it's pretty powerful, and it gives you a sense for, what the people of Ukraine are facing when they are, having to endure the bombings night after night of Russia. See, Russia's strategy is to bomb these areas into submission and then move in. And this is what they were trying to do in Orikhiv. This is 2 years ago.
Devoid of electricity, water, or heat, life on the front lines here in southern Ukraine is sheer survival. The town of Orikhiv once was home to about 20,000 people. Today, less than 10% remain. Abandoned pets roam the streets, hungry and traumatized by the near constant shelling, which has damaged or destroyed more than 70% of this city. The few who remain here say they've nowhere else to go. No car, no money, and no desire to give up the land their ancestors have occupied for generations.
This village is only a few miles from the front lines, and it's under fire every day because the strategy the Russians are using is to basically just bomb these towns into submission, terrorize the people into leaving, and then they can move in without any resistance. But these villagers are not going along with that plan. They're staying here in the village, but they're living down in the cellars of this apartment building. Let's go take a look. Here? Svetlana has 5 children, and she's been staying in this basement since June. You can see how smoky it is here now because they're using this green firewood to try and keep the place warm. And they're living in a tiny little section of this basement. Why haven't you left and gone somewhere else?
No, I want to live on my land, my Ukrainian land, and I hope that my city will be delivered soon. We just want peace. We just wish there were no rockets and bombs flying over our heads. We just want peace.
CBN's Orphans Promise and other organizations are helping people like Svetlana stay alive through the winter by delivering food, medicines, and warm clothing to this pastor of a local church who decided to stay here with his family to help those who can't leave.
When we were thinking about what to do, whether to stay or to leave, we were praying, and God answered us and said, I will bless you whether you go or whether you stay, but my name will be glorified more if you stay.
It's really very dangerous to be Ukrainians right now. Nobody knows who will be next. It doesn't matter where you are, in Kyiv, in West Ukraine, in Lviv, it doesn't matter, or here in frontline, you don't know who will be next.
And so close to the front lines, more people are seeking God.
Before the war, we had 30 to 40 people coming to the church, but now we have services with about 100. So the church has the answer for the people here.
The shelling gets worse after dark, so I asked if I could stay the night with Pastor Victor and his family. Not long after nightfall, the battle began.
There's a pretty large attack happening nearby, and this family I'm staying with responds to that by gathering around the kitchen table in prayer. That's what they always do when the bombs start falling, and they believe that it's vital to their protection. They believe that they're here for a reason, that God intends for them to stay here, and that through prayer and faith, they will be able to continue to serve the people who can't get out of this area, and they'll be protected in the process.
And I see that these people who are still be here, this church, who are served people here, they fighting for me too. It's like another level of soldiers.
We are the army of Christ. We are here to fight on his side and to bring the word of God to these people.
From Orihyiv, Ukraine, I'm Chuck Holton.
Gold scales says Russia scrapped the value-added tax on
Click the wrong button there. And so you can see there that there are, even in those places that are very close to being taken over by Russia, there are still civilians living there. And Russia's strategy is the old Soviet strategy of shooting artillery at them until there's nothing left of that town, and then moving in and taking it over. Now, Orihyiv is a ghost town today. That was 2 years ago. Now that pastor and his family have moved out. Virtually all the people are gone because Russia continued to hammer that town for the last 2 years. But they've yet to be able to take that town, even though it's only about a mile from the front lines. And so that front line has not moved at all in more than 2 years. So it just shows you the slow pace of Russia's advance. Nicholas says, what does Russia gain by targeting civilians? I already answered that one. So let's go to a different one. What will happen with the French and English nukes when they become Islamic states? That's a real good question. I'll take that as a rhetorical question, as nobody can say. Benjamin says, please do an episode on Iran's buildup of nuke weapons and delivery vehicles. I still need to send you that email about death of civilization. Will you please give me grace on the delay? Yeah, go ahead and send it. I'm not sure what you're talking about, actually. I want my sausages says, is it true that Venezuela has a ton of oil? Yes, it is true. And they do have a ton of oil. They have the largest untapped oil reserves, but having it and being able to get it out of the ground so you can use it are two different things. So that's, you have to take that into account. Now, Oscar says, interest rates are high. I don't think so. My investments are falling like a rock with the interest rate cuts that Trump is doing. That's not what's causing your investments to fall like a rock. Here is the federal funds target rate going all the way back to that goes way back. This is many, many years. And you can see that rates currently are historically higher than normal. The Fed funds rate is 4.5%. Throughout the Obama administration, that rate, actually the first Trump administration, Obama and the first Trump administration, that rate was close to zero. And now you can see there that time period where it was close to zero. And then when COVID hit, the rate had to climb so that they could keep from hyperinflating the currency because they were pumping so much of it into the economy during the pandemic. So let's see here. Take that down. How can a missile orbit indefinitely when it run out of fuel? Well, that's the point, Rich. It's a nuclear fueled thing. So would eventually run out of fuel, but it would be able to orbit for years, probably, with a nuclear engine. You'll understand you don't see anything with a nuclear engine on it except for like a submarine and a ship. That's because nuclear motors are very large, very complex, very expensive. It would be kind of hard to put that on something that flies. Russia says they've been able to do it, but there's no proof of that anywhere. Russia should designate RSF a terrorist organization in Sudan, right? Yes, of course. Absolutely. I need to do a whole podcast about Sudan, but I haven't had a chance. I'll get around to it. Bruce says, could the reduced production of oil force Russia to attack further south in order to acquire oil from southern countries? Well, it's one of the reasons why they're taking over the Donetsk and Luhansk provinces of Ukraine, because there's about 39 trillion cubic meters of natural gas that has been discovered in those regions. And so Russia wants that to keep Ukraine from competing with them for the European market, although that's kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Dillard says, what needs to happen to protect Christians in Nigeria? Yeah, I've been to Nigeria. I've done reporting on that. Again, I need to do a full podcast on it to really do it justice. There's a tremendous amount of death that's happening over there. They are just machine gunning tens of thousands of people, and nobody really cares. It's unfortunate, but I guarantee you that if I do a live on that, it's going to have 500 people watching, because where typically we have 1,500 to 3,000. When I do anything that has to do with Ukraine or Russia, I see a drop in the numbers. We've only got 1,000 people watching right now. That's pretty low for us, because if I talk about Russia or Ukraine, there's a lot of people that just aren't going to listen. They just don't care anymore. Cheryl Miller says, what type of strikes to Venezuela is Trump warning of? Airstrikes from ships, submarines, and aircraft. They're not going to be putting troops on the ground, but they will very likely be striking with missiles and bombs that are fired from aircraft, ships, and submarines. Okay. If nobody has tested nuclear weapons since the 1990s, how do they know they even work? Well, as I said, they can do a lot of computer modeling now. And I mean, you make a good point. Does that substitute for finding out if they still work? But we proved that they work in the 1990s, and we figured out what we needed to do to keep them maintained so that they would stay in working order. And we have done that for many, many years. So there are a lot of people out there that are smarter than I am that could answer that question, but that's the best I could do. Tizra says, can we trust the computer models for nuke testing? Well, you make a good point. That's a good point, Tizra Pinto. Alex says, do you think Russia will defend Venezuela if the United States strikes Venezuela? No, but Russia has been sending something to Venezuela in recent days. A bunch of Russian cargo planes have been landing in Caracas, most likely offloading air defense capabilities, because what Russia wants to do is they want to see if their most advanced S-400 air defense equipment can hold a candle to the F-35, the F-22, the B-1 bomber, etc. To see how, because they've never had a head-to-head matchup in real-world conditions. So they're using Venezuela as a laboratory. So in some way, Russia hopes that the United States will attack Venezuela so that they can get more data, more information out of it. Okay. Okay, so Alex asked the most obvious question that I've already answered. Christians in Sudan. Okay, so again, I need to talk about that, but I haven't had a chance yet to talk about it. Okay, so that's all the questions for today. I did want to pray for Rich Brady because Rich Brady says he's got a splitting migraine. And, there are a lot of people that watch our show who have medical issues. So let's get together. We got 1,000 people on. If you're the praying kind, then let's send them our best wishes by asking the Most High God, the creator of heaven and earth, to step into their lives and intervene in their medical situation, whatever it is, and heal them. I've seen that work. People have been healed. Prayer is extremely powerful. And especially when you get 1,000 people together, they're saying a prayer. And so even if you're not the praying kind and or take offense because I'm praying in Jesus' name or anything like that, just understand that what we're doing when we pray like this is we are sending the absolute best wishes we can to somebody, hoping that they do get better. So let's pray. Lord Jesus, we come to you right now and ask specifically that you would touch Rich Brady and that you would heal him. Father, you would immediately take away his headache. We know, Lord, that you will allow things like that into our lives so that we will get on our knees and cry out to you, because that's your will for us, that we get to know you better. We pray, Lord, that you would make yourself extremely real in Rich Brady's life right now, and that you would take away his headache. Lord, I pray for other people that are watching that have serious medical needs. I pray the same for them, Lord, that you would just be the great healer in their lives, that you would show them your mighty power by taking away their infirmities and healing them. So, Lord, we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, folks, that's all I've got for today. Thank you very much for watching the podcast, and I appreciate all of you. Please make sure you go to chuckholton.com and sign up over there for written summaries, special articles, documentaries, some of my books, all sorts of things that are being put out for our sponsors over there. And if you're not a sponsor, you're going to want to become one pretty quick before mid-November, because we're going to have some special things for our sponsors over there coming up very soon. So again, thank you for watching. That's all I've got for now. We'll see you next time.